Today's subject is contemplating on the Buddha. The Sanskrit word Buddha means the enlightened, the spiritually enlightened person is called a Buddha. Now, when we talk about the historical figure, Buddha, the founder of Buddhist religious tradition, there are many interesting things which are of great relevance to our own times. Buddha was born in the 6th century BC. There are different views among historians as to the exact year in which he was born. But one of the more commonly accepted dates among historians is 560 BC. That means 560 years before Christ. And he is said to have passed away in 480 BC. That means he lived for 80 years. We have to count backward. He was born in a place which is situated now in Nepal. It's a Himalayan kingdom, just a few miles away from Indo-Nepal border. But most of his lifetime was spent in India. In fact, one of the unique features of Buddhism is that it doesn't demand faith in a creator God. This is a very interesting feature of Buddhist tradition. One may say that this is true of Taoism, Shintoism, in a different way, because just like the well-known organized monotheistic religious traditions, none of these religious traditions insist on a belief in a single creator God and other aspects associated with this concept, like belief in a heaven, a hell, punishment, reward, divine punishment, divine reward, and so on. In this sense, Buddhism is sometimes designated as an agnostic religion, but is certainly not atheistic. Buddha was more concerned with life in this world, how to solve the problems that we encounter in our day-to-day life. The problems of death, disease, old age, sickness, and so on, which normally confront us, which make us upset psychologically. It creates an imbalance, especially when you attend the cremation ceremony of a close relative of a dear friend. You feel, oh yes, all these things will disappear one day. When you see an old man, if a young man sees an old man, if he is intelligent enough, it will make him a little wiser. Well, one day I too can get old. And if he goes to a crematorium or a cremation ground, if he is wise enough, he can remind himself, well, one day I also will have to face the same fate. It is not pessimism, it is not negativism. It is only a way of becoming wiser, so that we can live our life in a more intelligent manner. We have to remember that Buddhism is not a pessimistic or a negativistic religion. This is a common accusation that is leveled against Buddhist religious tradition. Not now, but for centuries, Buddhism used to be looked upon as something life-denying, which gives you a pessimistic picture of the whole phenomenon of human life. But that's not so. Buddha only taught us that these incidents, these realities, unpleasant realities of life, should make us open our inner eye. So a young man very proud of his wealth and youth and health, everything, can become a little more intelligent, can be a little more wise, more level-headed when he sees an aged person or when he visits a cremation ground. Because death is a reminder of two realities. One reality that's known to everyone, that death is certain. But the other reality is that we forget about it. Psychologically, it is said by some psychologists that though it's a reality from a philosophical and metaphysical point of view, even from a psychological point of view, still we cannot live in this world, we cannot lead a happy life in this world if we constantly remember the reality of death. But death also reminds you of something higher, something sublime, something which is elevating. Death is nothing but the disappearance of the visible empirical body. But it also makes us think, well, what lies beyond this visible empirical body? Is there something other than the empirical, the trans-empirical, the transcendental, something which continues to exist tomorrow? Now, this theory, this thinking, led the great philosophers of ancient times, mostly the great Indian sages, and also the pre-Christian Greek philosophers. Not necessarily pre-Christian, even later on Plotinus, Philo, and other Neoplatonists also thought about something that transcends the human body. And even in our own times, either closer to our own times, Immanuel Kant also thought about something, the thing in itself, which is the transcendental noumenal reality, which though we cannot perceive it, still it is very much a matter of reality, though we cannot experience it. Now, in the case of Buddha, something very interesting happened in the early stages of his life. He was born as a prince of a small kingdom. Even today, Nepal is a very small kingdom. And the small kingdom in which he was born was just a part of today's Nepal. Now, though he was the son of a very small king, just one small principality, he was brought up in extreme luxury with all necessities provided. He himself gave some kind of a monologue in a famous Pali canon. It's called Anguttara Nikaya. Now, Buddha's teachings were delivered in an ancient language, which is a kind of unrefined vernacular of Sanskrit. Not pure Sanskrit. It was a kind of vernacular prevalent among the common folks, the villages and the common masses of India at that time. Only scholars and the elite people used to speak in Sanskrit. Common people spoke in Prakrit language. And the ideas that Buddha preached in Prakrit language were collected a few centuries later after his passing away by his disciples, and they're preserved in book form, and the script in which these ideas were written was known as Pali. Now, Anguttara Nikaya is a well-known work belonging to the early Pali canonical literature, Buddhist canonical literature, in which Buddha himself gives a graphic description of how it really happened. Growing up in a luxurious palace as the son of a prince, without knowing anything about the world, without getting any chance to know about the hard unpleasant realities of life around us. There's a reason for it. Before reading that portion, quoting that portion, I should say another important, I should refer to another important episode. When Buddha was born, as it used to happen in those days, his parents called the astrologers, and astrology is a branch of science which specializes on prediction and prophecies as to what is going to happen in future. This is almost some kind of a science. They will calculate the position of stars and galaxies and Milky Ways, and then based on this they will calculate. They have their own ancient Vedic astrology called Vedanta Jyotisha. Jyotisha means the science of astrology, astrological calculation. So they were called, these astrologers were called, and they were requested to prepare a horoscope of this baby. And they predicted, well, he is going to be an emperor of ascetics. Now, this was a bit of a shock to his parents, because he was the only son. And in those days, a heir apparent, a young prince was supposed to continue the royal lineage of the dynasty. The dynastic tradition could be continued only by an enlightened prince. So the young prince was the result of a lot of constant prayers and penances performed by the parents, who prayed to God for a son, worthy son, who will continue the royal lineage. So, and the astrologer said he's going to be an ascetic. So this is a bit of a shock to him. So the king and his ministers made all arrangements for Buddha, for the little boy, to be brought up in an atmosphere of luxury, so that he will not know anything about sickness, poverty, misery, hunger, or any of the unpleasant realities of human existence. Now, this was the situation. So Buddha himself narrates his own life. This is from the well-known book. It is called Anguttara Nikaya, in which Buddha narrates his own days as he was growing up in the palace. I was tenderly cared for, brethren. Buddha, when he became old, was narrating his own early days in the palace to his disciples. So I was tenderly cared for, brethren, at my father's home, which was a palace. Lotus pools were made for me, in one place for the blue lotus flowers, in one place for white lotus flowers, and in one place for red lotus flowers, blossoming for my sake day and night. A white umbrella was held over me. Buddha, while answering a question from Ananda, explains his white umbrella. He says this white umbrella was the artificial atmosphere of luxury that his father created in the palace, so that the boy won't know anything about the unpleasantness, the misery, the problems of life in this world, the unpleasant realities of life in this world. So that's what he calls the white umbrella. He uses that term. Ananda later on asked, and Buddha explained. But here it should be taken the literary sense, because we are not going to refer to the long conversation between Ananda, the Buddha's famous disciple, and the great master himself. So day and night a white umbrella was held over me, so that I might not be troubled by cold, heat, dust, or dew, or anything. Endured, my brothers, with such wealth, being nurtured with such delicacy, there came this thought to me. Verily, the unenlightened worldling subject to old age, without escape from old age, when he sees another grown old, is oppressed, beset, and sickened. I too am subject to old age and cannot escape it. It is said that as he was passing through the streets of Kapilavastu, the kingdom, its capital Lumbini. Lumbini was the capital, the place where he was born. So as he was passing through the streets of the small town Lumbini, he saw a sick man, an old man, and a procession going on. He says it was a funeral procession. And also the face of a yogi, a Hindu yogi. So these four sights, these four visions awakened his inner eye. When I thought this, brothers, all pride of youth left me. He said, when I looked upon the face of an old man, well, it struck me that I too can get old. So my pride in my youth and health left me. And then he says, the unenlightened worldling subject to sickness, without escape from sickness. When he sees another person sick, he is oppressed, sickened. He becomes internally sick. I too am subject to sickness and cannot escape it. While I thought this, my brothers, all my pride in my health left me. So when he saw a sick man, the pride in health left him. He became humble. In fact, he became more realistic. In fact, an unpleasant experience, a reminder of the unpleasant realities of life, should not make us miserable. Very often, people want to get a very wonderful, brilliant, glorious, all-pleasant picture of life. If a religious tradition refers to, if a religious book refers to the unpleasant realities, sometimes, we often, it is too pessimistic. But it need not be pessimistic. Rather, this unpleasant reality, instead of making us sick or sad, should make us wise and more intelligent, so that we can live a more intelligent life, lead a more meaningful life. So it should become a kind of eye-opener. In fact, that's what happened in Buddha's life. In a way, it is a lesson for all of us in this world. One need not worry about the unpleasant realities of life. Rather, one should learn from them, so that he could lead a more intelligent, more meaningful life. Then, verily, the unenlightened worldling subject to death, without escape from it, when he sees or she sees another dead, he is oppressed, beset, and sickened. I too am subject to death and cannot escape it. While I thought this, my brothers, all pride in life left me. So, Buddha says he became humble. When he saw an old man, his pride in his youth left him. When he saw a sick man, his pride in his health left him. And when he saw a dead person, suddenly it occurred to him that death is a reality which everyone has to encounter in life. So death is not something saddening, shocking. It is a creative crisis. Just movement from one place to another place. In one Hindu tradition and Vedantic tradition, in Buddhist tradition also, it's very important to remember, they believe in what is called cyclic movement. The cosmic existence and also the individual existence. Both the macrocosm and also microcosm. move in cycles and not in linear progression. Because if you believe in one life, you have got just one chance. You do good things, go to heaven. Do bad things, go to hell once for all. That's a terrible injustice on the part of God, not giving us just more than one chance. But Vedanta and Buddhist tradition tells us, well, life is not in linear progression. It is a cyclic progression. So, even if we couldn't do anything noble, anything meritorious, till now, we can do right now. And what little good deed we do right now won't be lost. It's like an amount of money that you put in a bank. That won't be lost. You can draw your check later on. So if not in this life, in future life, we can enrich our deposits of meritorious deeds. So in the Gita, there is an interesting dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. That should be read in connection with this episode in Buddha's life. Arjuna puts a question to Krishna. It's a very simple question. Now, Krishna taught him the science of selfless action, the art of doing our work as an act of worship. All these great noble ideas, the immortality of soul, the need for spiritual practice, the need for controlling our senses or diverting our senses towards positive channels. All these were taught by Krishna to Arjuna. Then Arjuna puts a simple question, which even a child in the primary school can ask. Well, ayadi shraddhayo pedo yoga chalida manasaka aprapya yoga samsiddhim kam gatim Krishna gachadi. The verse is this, the translation is this. Well, Krishna, you taught me all this. Suppose somebody practices somebody performs spiritual practices, japa, worship, meditation, praying in a church or a temple or in any place of worship, belonging to any religious tradition, whatever might be. Every single religious tradition is equally valid if you are sincere and honest and pure in mind. Now, Arjuna asked, suppose somebody dies before attaining anything, or there is a deviation. It often happens. Somebody falls from the accepted path. What happens? Don't you think that the eternal hell will be open to him? Krishna says no eternal hell. Krishna says no. Whatever little you do will remain. Nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgadim tata gacchati. Even if you practice meditation for half an hour, only one day, once in your life, or if you listen to one great noble spiritual idea and understand the idea seriously, or if you read one line of a holy book which contains a holy idea, spiritual idea, that will not be lost. That will remain. Nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgadim tada gacchati. Partha naiveha namutra vinashas tasya vidyade. Nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgadim tada gacchati. Krishna tells Arjuna, you are absolutely wrong. Nothing will be lost. If you practice a little spirituality right now, today, that will remain in your account. And if not in this life, maybe next life, you can continue your spiritual journey from where you have left in this life. Because whatever little you have done, good, noble deed, even if you have helped a poor, weak, sickly person to cross the street, to move across the street, that little deed will remain in your account. That's the meaning of Kalyanakrit. Kalyanakrit means somebody who does any noble deed, not necessarily praying in a place of worship, not necessarily any kind of conventional ritual. Any noble, meritorious deed done with perfect unselfishness will produce its meritorious results. That will take you from where you stand to a higher level in spiritual life. So one can start any day, any time. Let's say you are never late and nothing will be lost. Any time you can start. That's the implication of cyclic existence. Because whatever we do in this life, we accumulate in our mind these tendencies and impressions, and they will produce, if they are good deeds, they will produce meritorious results, and that will help us in our onward spiritual journey, not only in this life, in the next life. That is the implication of these fundamental principles which are accepted in Vedanta and also in Buddhism, the law of karma and the doctrine of rebirth. Now, this is Buddha's teachings. So, in fact, what happened in Buddha's life was nothing but opening of the inner eye. Then, after this incident, when he saw these four symbols, when he had these four visions, the vision of a sick person, an aged person, an old person, and a dead body, and then the face of a yogi who has understood the truth of life and the wisdom of that realization was visible on his face. There are different versions, but this is the version that's given in Ashokghosha's Buddha Vijaya, the classical work belonging to around 2nd or 3rd century AD. There are several books, of course, in the Buddhist tradition, different versions. More or less, they agree with each other. So, after this incident, Buddha left his home, his palace. He had just one son, Rahul. So, he left his wife, young wife, Yashodhara, that is the name, and a little child, and he left his palace and traveled all over India, maybe in many parts of Nepal also. In those days, India practically meant the whole of Nepal, today's Indian subcontinent, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. All these, the whole geographical region was part of the cultural entity, not the political entity, cultural entity known as Bharatavarsha, means India. India was a cultural concept in those days. So all these geographical regions were part of it. And during Buddhist time, this region extended right up to Samarkand and parts of to Chinese Turkmenistan. We'll find it later, some differences. Now, after that, he wandered all over India, and then he reached a place near Bodh Gaya, that is in today's Bihar province of India, and he sat under a tree. So he took a vow. The great classical writer says, Ihasane sushudu me shariram dugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yatu aprapya siddhim bhujanma dullabham naiva asanan kayamatas chalishyate. This is the verse. Translation is this. I am sitting under this tree, and I won't get up from here till I get the supreme spiritual wisdom. Let my body perish. Let my flesh dry out. Even if I am reduced to a mere skeleton, that's the meaning. Tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yat. Even if my bone structure also, even my skeleton also is crushed into pieces, still I won't get up from this seat till I get spiritual wisdom. So you can see the classical posture of Buddha seated on meditative posture. You can find in some of the classical writings, in the works of the great masters, Eastern masters, paintings, you find Buddha seated on Padmasana. the meditative posture, reduced to mere skeleton. That picture also sometimes you find in some Buddhist temples and in the works of the great Buddhist masters, great painters. So he continued this penance for a long time, and then he became so emaciated. And he said that one day, just before he was about to start his meditation, that spiritual practice in the morning, he entered the river nearby. And then he was about to climb up, but he could not. The whole day and night he was sitting under the tree, except when he had to answer the demands of the human body nature. So one day he was just climbing up the steps from the river, and he became so weak he could move. Then he realized bodily torture, torturing one's own body, tormenting one's own body, is not the path to spiritual evolution, spiritual unfoldment. And then he felt the real path for spiritual progress is the middle way. By this time, he had already become an enlightened teacher, and he started preaching all over the country. And his first sermon was delivered in Benares. Now, I shall just give an outline of his fundamental teachings. His teachings can be approached from two angles. Now, just before entering the subject, I should give an idea of the evolution of Buddhist philosophical tradition. Today, when we talk about Buddhist philosophy, we talk about Shunyavada, the doctrine of emptiness, and subjective idealism, the doctrine of Yoga-Acharya or Vijnana Marga. These are all related to the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which is very popular in countries like China, Japan, and so on, Korea and other countries. And then there are two other schools of thought, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, which are realists, Buddhist realists. It's related to Hinayana Buddhism, Theravada as it is called, which is practiced in countries like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, and other countries. Now, these philosophical systems evolved only much later, almost 450 years after Buddha's passing away. These famous, well-known four schools of Buddhism, which are traditionally taught in universities today, which are called the four Buddhist schools of thought. The doctrine of emptiness is called Shunyavada, and the doctrine of subjective idealism is called Vijnanavada, and the doctrine of realism, which is divided into two groups. All these philosophical systems took their full shape centuries after Buddha's passing away. Buddha himself was not a metaphysician. He was not a philosopher. Though these high metaphysical systems evolved in later centuries after Buddha's teachings, Buddha himself did not teach any or preach any definite metaphysical system. His system was more or less an ethical system. It's called the early Buddhism is essentially an ethical system. How to live in this world, how to control our senses, how to go beyond the tyranny of desires, which is called Trishna, and how to come out of this cycle of transmigration through nirvana. These were the points that he emphasized. So to begin with, he taught four fundamental truths. It's called Four Noble Truths. The first one is there is grief pain in this world. Dukkha is called. That's true. From an empirical point of view, for anybody who is not aware of his true nature, who is not aware of the fact that is the Atman, which is beyond the psychophysical mechanism, for any such ordinary people, whole life, in a way, is full of unpleasantness. Death is a source of grief. Sickness is a source of grief. Whatever you do, even to achieve something, essentially becomes a source of grief, because whatever you gain will be lost one day. So, the world is essentially full of grief. Remember, this is only for a highly evolved soul, not necessarily in spiritual terms. For very common people who are not very different from their counterparts in the animal kingdom, the world is full of pleasure because they identify themselves with the body. So they believe sensory pleasure is the only thing, only object of life in this world. For such people, the world is neither painful nor pleasant. Just make the best of whatever you see around. But ordinarily, people who are a little evolved, even in intellectual terms, who are evolved, they look upon the world from a different angle. So they try to understand, they make an attempt to ask the question, what's the meaning of my life? What's the meaning of existence? Then these realities may emerge in the mind. So Buddha says, there is suffering in life. In birth, in old age, in illness, in death, in contact with the disagreeable, in separation from the agreeable. So you get something, you are satisfied. Contact with the agreeable. But whatever you get will be lost one day, money, wealth, everything. So that leads to grief. So any kind of momentary happiness will be invariably followed by unhappiness. So that is also a source of unhappiness. Before we got the object that gives us happiness, we were unhappy. When we get it, we are anxious not to lose it. So this anxiety also is a kind of unpleasantness. It also a kind of unhappiness. And when we lose it, which is inevitable, that also is a kind of happiness. So Buddha says, there is dukkha, it is called, dukkham atti. That's a Pali term. It means there is pain, there is grief in this world. So birth is a grief, old age, illness, death, everything. So suffering is invariably associated with the holding of the psychophysical mechanism. There is no escape from it. Next to truth, four noble truths. The second noble truth is there is a cause for the suffering. Buddha's analysis of human life, essentially based on a kind of humanistic realism. There is nothing very transcendental about it. Very empirical, but very spiritual. That's the point. Buddha's philosophy is so humanistic, so strongly built upon universal moral principles. Apparently, you may feel it is a kind of empiricism, phenomenalism, but it contains the highest, noblest spiritual philosophy. You have to remember, spirituality doesn't need the help of a creator God. Religion needs that. Religion is naturally associated with the concepts of a creator God, the concept of creation, the belief in a holy book, a set of rituals, then an intermediary between God and man, priest or whatever you may call, a place of worship. All these are necessary ingredients of religion, but not necessarily of spirituality. Buddha was a purely spiritual man. Spirituality built upon pure humanism, human compassion, human love. So that's why Buddha doesn't much bother about God. In fact, one of his disciples, Ananda, asked him about God. Buddha's answer was somewhat evasive. He didn't say that God doesn't exist. He didn't say God does exist. But he left a lot of scope for debates by succeeding generations of philosophers. So sometimes Buddha is looked upon as an agnostic. But great admirers of Buddha, spiritual teachers like Swami Vivekananda, have given a definite view. And Swami Vivekananda says Buddha's philosophy was essentially based upon the Upanishadic spiritual teachings, the fundamental teachings of the Vedic Vedantic literature, minus some of the rituals and the ideas associated with gods and goddesses. That's Buddha's philosophy. So second noble truth is there is a cause for suffering. And Buddha says the root cause of human suffering is the ignorance of his own true nature, his own or her own true nature. Our attachment towards the psychophysical mechanism and the desire for sensory enjoyments, which comes as a part of this attachment. And then Buddha insisted that there is no supernatural agency involved in human suffering. It is not anybody who supervises your fate or your destiny. Buddha says the individual himself or herself is responsible for his own or her own fate. There is no transcendental authority guiding or supervising or imposing his will upon humanity. In fact, this is a very special feature of Buddhism. See, Buddhism is essentially a spiritual philosophy, but qualitatively it doesn't belong to the same category of spirituality as teachings of Lao Tse or Shinto tradition or even Jainism, which was a contemporary religious concept, because Mardhamana Mahavira was an elder contemporary of Buddha who lived during his own time. He was also a prince who was born in Vaishali, not far from at least not very far, maybe 500, 600 miles away from the place where Buddha himself was born, not beyond that. So, Buddha insisted that we are responsible for our fate. If our today is the product of our yesterday's actions, then the tomorrow can be our own creation. We can do better things, we can do good things, so we can change our destiny. There is no supernatural authority, a creator God or anybody involved in this. So Buddha's ethical philosophy was essentially kind of empirical ethical philosophy, not based on the transcendental authority of a God or creator or anybody. The third noble truth which Buddha taught was there is a cessation of the suffering. So this suffering, this pain, this grief will come to an end when we get rid of the desire which are associated with the senses. Since suffering is due to a cause, the removal of the cause means the cessation of suffering. Now, and this is possible through nirvana. And Buddha will later explain the process of nirvana. There is the way to cessation of suffering, to get away from this world of suffering. All suffering cease when the root cause, ignorance of our own true nature, is eradicated. And this is possible through nirvana. Nirvana is the attainment of perfect knowledge. It's called bodhi. So Buddha, the word itself implies, in one sense, the one who has attained bodhi, pure spiritual wisdom. In other ways, you can say in negative terms, nirvana is the extinguishing of all flames of desire. This is tanha, it is called in Pali and Prakriti, Trishna in Sanskrit, desire for sensory enjoyments in normal language. And this nirvana is to be attained by following the noble eightfold path. So one can get out of this cycle of constant suffering, this bondage, by following the eightfold path, which takes us to nirvana. And once we attain nirvana, we get out of this endless cycle of transmigration, and then Trishna is completely removed. Then we become aware of our true nature. I should tell you at this point that from a metaphysical point of view, Buddhist philosophical systems which emerged in later centuries had a lot of weak points, which Shankaracharya's Advaita philosophy tried to rectify. Because Shankaracharya's Advaita philosophy was as a philosophical system which he built up as an answer to some of the problems left behind Buddhism. Buddhism historically went through 3 phases, it is said by historians. The first phase of nearly 450 years, the period of recognition, the period of glory. The second 450 years was a period during which the great metaphysical systems, which I referred to earlier, emerged, and Buddhism spread all over the world. The third 450 years was a period of degradation, because Buddhism absorbed people belonging to different cultural traditions, and some of them were barbarians. People who were following all kinds of diabolical rituals and faith systems embraced Buddhism, and very often they brought with them their own diabolical customs and practices, which led to some kind of a degradation of Buddhist tradition in India, but not necessarily in other countries. But what happened when Buddhism traveled to Japan, of course before that to China and other countries, it adapted to the local cultures and traditions. Practically, it retained some of the original teachings, but very often it adapted the local customs and habits, and sometimes it changed its shape completely. But in India, what happened? Buddhism, as many people wrongly believe, Buddhism died out. Buddhism did not die in India. Buddhism was absorbed into the main Vedantic tradition. It's like in a big ocean, Sometimes there will be high waves, tsunamis, 250, 200 feet high tides may emerge in ocean. But, after some time, these waves will be reabsorbed in the main body of water in the ocean. So Hindu Vedantic tradition was like a mighty ocean in which Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and so many different religious traditions emerged. They got a place, but then they got reabsorbed into the main body of Vedantic tradition with the advent of Shankaracharya. Anywho, that's a different subject. I'm not coming to that. I shall just narrate within a short time. We don't have much time left. The eightfold path. 8 stages of this path leading to nirvana. First one is right view, which is called, samyak drishti. It is called proper understanding of the 4 noble truths we already outlined. A correct understanding with proper contemplation on the implications of these 4 noble truths. There is suffering, there's a cause for it, there's a way out of it, and all these noble truths. And then the second noble, so the second stage of this eightfold path is right resolution, samyak sankalpa, a firm determination. That means when we start spiritual life, we must have a firm determination to leave behind certain things and to accept certain things and to follow the path. It is called firm determination. The third stage of this noble eightfold path is right speech, abstaining from lying, slandering, gossiping, and making, not making proper use of our articulation, our ability to speak all times. The fourth stage is right conduct, means samyak kriya. Abstaining from evil deeds like killing, cheating, and so on, and diverting our ability to work towards creative, productive, positive channels. The fifth stage of this noble eightfold path is right means of livelihood, which is samyak ajiva, abstaining from trades in arms, in flesh. That means we should not distribute, not selling meat in marketplaces, and not selling intoxicants, and not indulging in trade related to poisonous things. In those days, all these many of these customs were related to the social conditions prevailing in those days. So we had to remember. The sixth stage of the noble eightfold path is samyak effort. Completely banishing all evil thoughts from our mind, and along with that, entertaining good noble thoughts which are helpful in spiritual life, because thoughts ultimately determine our real personality much more than our actions, because actions are determined by thoughts. Every action originates in mind as an idea, and then it becomes an act. So abstaining evil thoughts and concentrating on noble thoughts is very important. So it's called samyak vyayama, or right effort. The seventh stage is right mindfulness, samyak smriti, constant remembrance of the impermanence of the fleeting nature, the changeable nature of sensory pleasures. Because very often people go out of their way and do evil things for acquiring sensory pleasures under the impression that they are permanent. They can bring us permanent happiness, which is not true. So constantly reminding oneself of that impermanence, changeable nature of empirical sensory pleasures is a great spiritual practice. All these ideas are found in some of the devotional scriptures of Hindu tradition, also earlier books. And then right concentration, samyak samadhi, means practice of contemplation and meditation on the importance of the Four Noble Truths, and also on the impermanence of or the fleeting nature, the changeable nature of the sensory world pleasures. These are the 8 stages of the Eightfold Noble Path, which Buddha taught as a path leading to nirvana, which will enable us to understand our true nature. It's not very easy to give an exhaustive account of Buddha's teachings, because Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist canon, both in Pali and also in Sanskrit, run into thousands of titles, different philosophical schools, and then the old Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, all these run into several volumes. So I have just given a brief outline of the relevance of Buddha's life and teachings. And maybe the greatest lesson that we have to learn from Buddha is to look upon this world and learn from the world. Even the unpleasantness of the world is a great teacher if we can keep our mind open, because the so-called suffering of the world is a great teacher which reminds us of the impermanence of the external sensory phenomena, and also it reminds us of the need to go beyond the impermanence so that we will understand our true nature. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.